Why do the religious just make stuff up? I mean, their entire belief system is made up. There's no evidence that any of it is actually true. But this is even worse. It's playing make-believe to get around problems. But that still doesn't actually solve the problems, does it? So here comes one case that we can examine. It's not going to work out as well as the religious might hope that it does, but hey, it's a case study. Let's go look at it. We're going to look at something that the religious do constantly, and that's just make stuff up about their gods. This time it's Tim Barnett. Could have seen that one coming, but it could have been any of them because they all have to do it. When a believer comes up with a question or the non-believer poses a problem, the religious just invent something out of whole cloth and declare, well, that's how it could have been. So what? I care what actually happened, not the shit that you made up in your head. Show me what actually happened. Show me the stuff that you ought to have evidence for. But they can't. Theist story time is all they ever have. So let's see an example of that, starting now.
This is one of the most difficult challenges to belief in God.
Oh, I bet it's not, at least for you. Because if I'm guessing right, and I usually am, you're just going to yank your answers straight out of your ass because that's what you really want to be true. You're just going to tell us what you believe on faith and not what you can actually demonstrate is the case with evidence. That's why he's only making videos for the existing believers, because he knows that the rest of us are just going to laugh at him. So let's get ready to chuckle. Go ahead, get on with it, Tim. Make a fool of yourself once again.
If God is all good and all powerful, then why is there evil and suffering in the world?
Of course, that depends on a couple of unsupported assumptions, right? First, that there is a God in the first place, something that Tim cannot present any convincing evidence for. He doesn't even try. All he can do is make excuses. Again, he's only talking to believers because they're not going to ask the hard questions that he has no actual answers to. They just want to believe as much as Tim does. But the second question is, how do you know this God of yours is good? In fact, how do you know anything about God's supposed characteristics? I don't care about what you believe. I don't care about what your church says. I don't care about your traditions. I don't care about your silly book, since how did the people who wrote the book know anything? I care what you can demonstrate is actually correct. Oh, but the people who wrote the Bible, they were inspired by God. Says who, and how do you prove that? Your claims mean absolutely nothing without evidence to back them up. That's why they appeal to faith, because they have nothing else. It just makes them look stupid.
Now, this isn't just an academic challenge. It's deeply personal, especially for those of us who have experienced evil and suffering.
No, it's actually not. Reality is not personal. You live in the world that you actually live in. The world is however it happens to be. If you choose to anthropomorphize reality, you're doing something wrong, but a lot of people do that, don't they? They take anything bad that happens to them as a personal slight, like reality meant to do that to them because they did something wrong, I guess. But that's not how it works. I mean, my parents, they both died of cancer. Sort of, since my mother was old, and who knows if the cancer got her or old age did. We just will never know that. But both of them smoked when I was young. My mother quit after a couple of years, but my father, he smoked his entire life at work. He just hid it. And then in his mid-60s, he hit the hospital with stage 4 cancer, which had spread to pretty much every part of his body by that point. Well, he wouldn't have if he had just gotten treatment, but he hid that too. He knew but he didn't want anybody else to get mad at him for having smoked his entire life, and he knew my mother would have, so he pretended that it was walking pneumonia and the doctors didn't understand why it wouldn't go away. And by the time he had to go to the hospital, there was nothing anyone could do. Less than a week in, and he was gone. It wasn't until the funeral that all of his work buddies were saying, well, he just smoked like a chimney every single day. We had no clue at all. Now, granted, I hadn't lived there for many years, but my mother had no clue of any kind. Anytime she thought she smelled cigarette smoke on him, he said, well, yeah, the people at work, they all smoke. And she bought into it. I don't know. I probably wouldn't have, but whatever. He was good at hiding it. Now, I'm not mad at him. It was his life and his call. He decided what to do with his life, just like we all do. But if he had gotten mad at reality for giving him cancer, it would have been stupid, just like the religious when they do it. He did it to himself. He did it knowing the potential consequences, since that's why they supposedly quit in the first place. It is what it is. Reality isn't personal. Reality isn't conspiring against you. That's just not how any of this stuff works.
Now, I don't have any illusions that I'm going to answer the problem of evil in this short video. However, I want to highlight some of the ways that Christians have responded. These are typically called theodicies. They are reasons why God might allow bad stuff to happen.
They're made-up excuses. Let's be honest, that is all that this is. Tim is just making shit up, or at the very least, he's reporting on crap that other Christians have made up, because none of this stuff is at all demonstrable. This is one reason that I wanted to do this video, because it's going to be so painfully easy. The religious don't care about actual reality. They just want comforting stories that allow them to maintain their faith. It's why all of the supposed solutions to Bible contradictions are so ludicrous. It's just apologists offering up bald rationalizations that get them where they want to go, instead of presenting evidence for how it actually happened. I don't care what you believe. I care what you can demonstrate. And the religious, they don't give a damn about any of that, do they? So his 5 reasons why God allows evil, at least that's his video title, are just made up because he can't prove God exists, and you can't possibly measure God's intentions, characteristics, or actions without some way to prove that God exists and be able to observe that real God. Stop making a fool of yourself, Tim. This is just absurd.
For example, we might talk about the fall. The world isn't the way God originally made it. Human beings were placed into the Garden of Eden, and it was good, but they disobeyed. They brought sin into the world, and that act of sin has consequences. The Apostle Paul says that the whole creation has been groaning. So there's the fall.
And God, supposedly being omniscient, although you can't prove that, would have known that would happen. Yet he did it anyway. What a dick. And sorry if I have to say this, but does anyone think that Tim is gonna drink all of that? Is this video just an excuse for him to get drunk? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Alright, back to his rationalization. God knew the consequences of his actions. He had to, based on what Christians say, and he did it anyhow, making everything that happened up to this day God's fault. I mean, beyond the fact that he put the tree of knowledge of good and evil into the garden in the first place, with 2 people who were made without the understanding of the consequences of disobeying, and that makes God a double dick. It's like putting a toddler on the kitchen counter with a pot of boiling water and telling them not to touch it and then just walking away. When that kid inevitably gets burned because the kid doesn't know any better, it's your fault, not theirs. You should have known better. And in this case, God had to have known better. God didn't have a choice if those characteristics are actually accurate, which means he must have done it on purpose. Your God is an immoral monster. Let's not pretend otherwise.
Next, some Christians appeal to human free will as another reason why God might allow evil and suffering in the world.
Except, it doesn't do a thing for teleological evil. That is, the things that humans have absolutely nothing to do with. A lion killing a gazelle on the African plain is, at least according to some people, evil. I don't think so, but we'll go with what some people say. What did human free will have to do with that? How are humans even involved? Or disease. Disease in animals, if you want to go that way, but it works for humans too. How is human free will responsible for the Black Death? Or the microscopic parasite called acanthamoeba that gets into your eyes and eats them? Or hell, let's just let Stephen Fry say it because he did it so well.
Suppose what Oscar believed in as he died, in spite of your protestations, suppose it's all true, and you walk up to the pearly gates and you are confronted by God. What will Stephen Fry say to him, her, or it?
I will basically, what's known as theodicy, I think. I'll say bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? That's what I would say.
How does any of that have anything at all to do with human free will? Explain that one for us, Tim. Or maybe you think that God doesn't care. This is why all of these rationalizations ultimately fail, because they don't actually explain the problem. They're all just half-ass inventions to begin with. You can't prove that human free will causes any teleological evils. This is just dumb.
The free will theodicy posits that evil and suffering exist as a consequence of humans having the freedom to make choices, which includes the possibility of choosing to do evil.
Which still doesn't explain the existence of eyeball-eating organisms. It doesn't explain the existence of disease. It doesn't really explain anything. It's just a bald rationalization because the religious look at the world and find it hard to square reality with their religion. And so, as you might expect, it just makes stuff up, just like Tim is doing here. So long as they can come up with a reasonable-sounding explanation, reasonable to them, well, they've solved the problem, right? No, they haven't. They only do that if they propose the correct explanation, the explanation that is actually supported by the evidence. And they're not even trying to do that. Tim certainly isn't. He's just tossing out a bunch of nonsense he made up with no evidence for any of it because he's hoping that something will stick. This is just throwing shit at the wall and playing make-believe. That is not how any of this works, though. Just because you can make up an ad hoc explanation that sounds good to you, that doesn't make that explanation true. Stop being an idiot.
As a matter of fact, the Bible's full of people exercising their free will in disobedience of God, and suffering results.
Yet none of it has anything at all to do with teleological evil, does it? Let's go back to Exodus with the 10 plagues of Egypt, where Pharaoh's supposed disobedience got his people basically murdered wholesale. How was that not God's doing? It's not like saying, well, I will not let you people go, suddenly makes rivers turn to blood and the firstborn all drop dead. That's not free will. That was God. God being a dick. In fact, God specifically hardened Pharaoh's heart so he couldn't let them go because God is just a murder hobo. He apparently gets off on it. So this explanation absolutely does not work. Your God is just an asshole. Fuck you, Tim.
Another reason might be for a greater good. Greater good theodicies posit that despite the presence of evil and suffering, there exists a greater good or purpose that justifies or outweighs the existence of such evil and suffering.
Then please tell us what the greater good is for cancer. Go ahead. This ought to be good, because they can never do it, right? I actually look for any justification that the religious can give for this, and all Christians can do is say, well, it's a punishment for evil people. Except infants can and do die of cancer. Oh, well, everybody's evil. It's a fallen world. Yeah, fuck you. This is the problem, that they're all just making this shit up. They have their beliefs that can never change because they can never be wrong because they don't want them to be. And therefore, they have to figure out some tall tale that they can spin to keep the true things true, while keeping the already faithful still believing, because holy hell, they don't want to have to go out and get real jobs. This is just lying to yourself and everybody around you. It's embarrassingly pathetic, but this is Tim Barnett we're talking about, right?
One example is found in Genesis 50:20. Joseph endures tremendous evil at the hands of his brothers. But he says to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today."
Sorry, Tim, but my book says a thing means absolutely nothing. I mean, honestly, keep your Bible stories to yourself unless you, A, have evidence that any of it ever happened, or B, you just want to use it as a concept and aren't pretending that it's true, which, fine, okay, go ahead, do that, I don't care. But we're not going to let you pretend that it really happened down the road without evidence to back it up. Now, I think it's funny how people like Tim don't bring up teleological evil, not ever. It's not like there aren't natural disasters in the Bible, but I guess that from their perspective, that can't be teleological because God does everything. God floods the world. God sends storms. God gives people diseases, or maybe it's demons, depending on the story. But since God created demons knowing full well what they do, I suppose it doesn't really matter, does it? At the end of the day, God is still a dick. Fuck your God.
Of course, Jesus' death on a cross would be another example of a great good coming from a horrendous evil.
Oh, right. Jesus had a bad weekend for your sins. Sure, getting nailed up on a cross would suck, but he still wound up with all of his godly powers in heaven, so, yeah, sorry if I'm not impressed. If I knew that I would get godly powers with no questions whatsoever, I was absolutely certain that it would happen, hell, I might volunteer to get nailed to a cross. The benefits far outweigh the bad bits. But remember, God set all this stuff up, and he can't say that he didn't know the outcome, and that makes God ultimately responsible. God is responsible for everything. If he didn't want it to turn out this way, it wouldn't have. It couldn't have. He could have tweaked it to produce a better end result. That makes God a sadistic bastard, unworthy of any respect, much less worship. If God was real, and we have no evidence for that, we should despise him. It's funny watching the bald rationalization the religious go through to get around that, right?
Another reason why God might permit evil and suffering is called the soul-making theodicy.
I'm just stopping here to point out that the camera's kind of weaving around a lot, right? I think the cameraman got into the wine. By the end of this, I figure we might see him fall on the floor. Let's see how it goes. Anyway, sorry, Tim, you were in the middle of a point? Please continue.
It's argued that some evil and suffering is necessary for the development of human souls.
Are you saying that God couldn't have come up with a better way? Because I certainly could. What the hell's wrong with your God? If you notice, a lot of these excuses are just placing limitations on God. Well, God couldn't have done it another way. Why not? I could have, given unlimited power, and that's supposedly what God has, although you still can't prove it. I mean, I'm just a lowly human, and I could do better. With God's omnipowers, why couldn't he have done what I could have? That's why all of these are just excuses. It's stories that the religious tell each other when these problematic concepts come up, so they can just go back to believing blindly, because at the end of the day, they don't really care. These are minor stumbling blocks on their road to paradise. Kick those problems off the path without a thought and just keep blindly moving forward. Yeah, no thanks.
In this view, this world serves as a veil of soul-making, where struggles and trials faced by individuals contribute to the formation of their characters. This world gets us ready to spend eternity with God.
Exactly how? Because in heaven, at least according to most Christians, we won't have physical bodies. So how does, say, deformity prepare us for anything? There will be no disease. If you have no body, you can't have disease. So how do children dying of cancer help? This is why we have to ask a lot of questions. And let's be honest, they don't have any answers. They just have excuses so that they can just set it aside and not think about it anymore because it's really uncomfortable. But that doesn't make sense, does it? But then again, they're quick to kick all of these objections under the rug because it doesn't make them feel good. And that's what this is all about. Them feeling good. Not about them being factually correct, them feeling good. Sad, huh?
Finally, some argue that God allows evil and suffering because he wants to reveal certain things about himself that otherwise we wouldn't know.
Like, he's a dick. I can't imagine what positive thing any of this would show about your God. Please explain how brain-eating amoebas or flesh-eating disease tells us anything worthwhile about your imaginary friend. In fact, we don't even have to go with disease or parasites. How does getting raped, what does that tell us about your God? That you think God would be really excited for us to know? That he couldn't have come up with a better way to tell us? Because I'd love to know what God couldn't have done differently. Not that Tim would ever have a clue. This is just, I want to show you that I'm a complete asshole. As if that's any kind of surprise. Okay, done. Now fuck off. You're not helping. We don't need you. Just go away.
For example, it's in a world with sin that God demonstrates his grace, his mercy, his forgiveness, his justice, and even his enemy love.
How does he do any of that in a world where he imposes pain and suffering on others? This is like stomping on ants screaming, I love you, I love you. Yeah, fuck off. Because I could certainly have done all of that without forcing pain on people, or on anybody for that matter. In fact, I could have done all of that without introducing sin in the first place. How about, I don't know, giving Adam and Eve the capacity to understand the consequences of their actions before they ate the stupid fruit? How about not putting the tree in there in the first place? Because a rational person doesn't put temptations in the path of people who are prone to sin. It's like breaking into an alcoholic's house and filling the fridge with booze, just to see if they succumb, you know? Every explanation the religious ever come up with is just an excuse. Why is your God such a wanker? They don't have any real answers, but I do. God was just made up by primitive people who put all of their worst traits into their imaginary friend, and modern Christians have to try to explain their way around it. That's all Tim is doing. He's just trying to explain his way around the stupid conception of his God. He really is that dumb.
So we've looked at some of the reasons why God might allow evil and suffering, but I want you to notice something. There's still some liquid left over.
We'll get to that in a minute. You have offered bald rationalizations for why God might have done some of these things while ignoring all the problems with those excuses because you don't actually care what really happened, only how you can comfort the already faithful so they keep giving you money. Saying, well, this is how it could have happened, doesn't mean that any of them are actually how it did happen. How did it happen? How can you prove that it happened that way? That's the part that they never have an answer for because all of this is just childish story time in their heads. They don't care about the actual truth so long as they get back to their emotional comfort. And I'm not saying that they have to know. It might forever be beyond their capacity to find out. That is certainly possible. But if that's true, then stop pretending that you have explanations. Say you don't know, because you don't know. Let others make up their own minds. Granted, he can't do that because it's potentially financially disastrous, and we all know that's what this is all about. Christians just want it to be true. But we all know what wanting a thing means. Jack shit.
That's because we don't have all of God's reasons figured out, and we shouldn't expect to. He's God, we're not. We do our best to understand God's ways, and then we trust him even when we don't understand.
But here's the thing. You can't even show that your God is real. You know nothing about any gods, nothing that you can prove. You just really like the idea that they exist. This is just a theist telling other theists stories so the money keeps flowing in. There is no indication that any of this is actually true, certainly no evidence that any of this is true. There's no reason to think it's even possibly true. They just really want to believe. That is not enough. It will never be enough. Of course, that's why he's making content for people who don't really care. They're in it for the fifis, not the facts. He just has to feed them enough hope to keep the money rolling in. And that doesn't make any of it true, does it? That's why relying on the desperately faithful doesn't get you anywhere. But it's all that con men like Tim can go after because they're easy prey. Once you understand what's actually going on, it becomes painfully obvious why nobody ought to be impressed by any of this. That some are? That's really just pathetic. It says a lot of really bad things about their epistemic standards and rational wherewithal, which makes the believers pathetic. And I really don't think that's much of a surprise, do you?